The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as Catherine walked slowly through the rose garden. Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the petals of a white rose, remembering how William had picked one just like it for her on their wedding day. The doctors had been clear in their diagnosis 3 months ago, but she had insisted on keeping it private until now. The cancer was aggressive, and despite all the treatments available to the royal family, her time was limited. William stood at the kitchen window, watching his wife from a distance. He had noticed the change in her walk weeks before the official diagnosis. The way she held herself, the careful movements, the forced smiles when she thought no one was looking. As future King of England, he had faced many difficult moments, but nothing had prepared him for this. The weight of knowing what was coming pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. Their children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, were still unaware of the full severity of their mother's condition. Catherine had insisted they maintain as much normalcy as possible. She still helped with homework, attended school events when her energy allowed, and tucked them into bed each night. But William could see the exhaustion in her eyes growing deeper with each passing day. The palace staff had begun to notice subtle changes too. Catherine's public appearances became less frequent, with official statements citing minor illnesses or scheduling conflicts. Her personal secretary, Maria, often found herself making difficult phone calls to cancel events that Catherine had been looking forward to for months. The Queen, despite her own advanced age, had taken on additional duties to support her beloved daughter-in-law. Dr. Henderson, the royal physician, visited the palace twice weekly now. His medical bag seemed heavier each time, filled with medications that provided comfort but could not change the inevitable outcome. He had grown fond of Catherine over the years, admiring her grace and dedication to her royal duties. Breaking the news about her prognosis had been one of the hardest conversations of his medical career. Catherine's sister Pippa had moved into a guest wing of the palace temporarily. She helped with the children and provided emotional support, though both sisters often found themselves crying together when they thought they were alone. Their parents visited daily, bringing homemade meals and attempting to maintain cheerful conversations while their hearts were breaking. The couple had started having long conversations late at night, sitting together in their private sitting room. They talked about memories, about their hopes for the children, and about practical matters that needed to be addressed. William struggled to imagine a future without Catherine by his side, while she worried about how he would manage the pressures of royal life as a single father. Catherine had begun writing letters to her children, one for each birthday they would celebrate without her, one for their graduations, their weddings, and other milestone moments. She wrote slowly, choosing each word carefully, wanting to capture her love and wisdom for the years when she would not be there to guide them. William often found her at her desk, tears streaming down her face as she poured her heart onto paper. The palace gardens had become Catherine's sanctuary. She spent hours there, sometimes alone, sometimes with William walking quietly beside her. The staff had instructions to give her complete privacy during these times. She found peace among the flowers and trees, drawing strength from the natural world around her. The head gardener, old Thomas, had secretly planted additional white roses along her favorite path. As autumn approached, both William and Catherine knew that their time together was becoming precious and limited. They began to treasure even the smallest moments, sharing morning tea, reading together in the evening, watching their children play in the garden. Every ordinary moment had become extraordinary, because they both understood how few remained. The love that had carried them through years of royal duties and public scrutiny now faced its greatest test, and neither knew if they were strong enough for what lay ahead. The first snowfall of winter arrived early that year, covering the palace grounds in a pristine white blanket. Catherine stood at her bedroom window, wrapped in William's old university sweater, watching the flakes dance in the wind. The chemotherapy had taken most of her famous auburn hair, but she had refused to wear the expensive wigs the palace had ordered. Instead, she chose colorful silk scarves that William would carefully tie for her each morning. His hands gentle and practiced after weeks of helping her. Dr. Henderson's visits had increased to every other day. The medications were stronger now, making Catherine sleepy and sometimes confused. William had quietly rearranged his royal duties, declining overseas trips and limiting his public appearances to essential events only. The official explanation was a desire to spend more time with his young family, which was true, though incomplete. Their children had begun to ask more questions. George, being the eldest at 10, sensed that something serious was happening. He had noticed how carefully everyone spoke around his mother, how quickly conversation stopped when he entered a room. Charlotte, 8 years old, had started bringing her mother breakfast in bed without being asked, her small face serious with responsibility. Louis, the youngest at 5, simply wanted to spend every moment possible snuggled against his mother's side. Catherine had made a difficult decision to record video messages for special occasions in her children's future lives. Working with their private secretary, she spent her good days sitting in the sunroom, speaking directly to the camera as if her children were sitting before her. She recorded birthday messages, graduation congratulations, and words of advice for when they might be struggling. William often had to leave the room during these sessions, overwhelmed by the reality they represented. The Queen had privately increased her support for the family, often arriving unannounced for tea with Catherine. These visits were kept completely off the official schedule. Her Majesty would sit beside Catherine's bed when the younger woman was too weak to come downstairs, sharing stories from her own decades of marriage to Philip, and offering quiet wisdom about love, loss, and the strength required for both. William's brother Harry had flown in from California with his wife Meghan and their children. Despite years of family tensions, illness had a way of putting everything into perspective. Harry spent hours sitting with Catherine, reminiscing about happier times and making her laugh with stories from their early days as a couple. Meghan helped with the children, her own experience as a mother proving invaluable during this difficult time. The palace staff had become like extended family. Mrs. Morrison, the head housekeeper, brought Catherine her favorite soup every afternoon, even when she could only manage a few spoonfuls. The security team had quietly adjusted their routines to give the family more privacy, while ensuring their safety. Even the usually formal protocol officers had relaxed their strict rules, understanding that normal procedures seemed insignificant in the face of such personal tragedy. Catherine had grown increasingly spiritual during her illness. She spent time each morning in the palace chapel, sometimes alone, sometimes with William beside her. Father Michael, the palace chaplain, visited regularly for quiet conversations about faith, hope, and the mysteries of life and death. These talks brought Catherine a sense of peace that medicine could not provide. The couple had started a nightly ritual of looking through photo albums together. They would lie in bed, Catherine's head on William's shoulder, as they turned pages filled with memories of their courtship, wedding, and early years of marriage. They laughed at pictures from their university days, smiled at images from their honeymoon, and lingered over photographs of their children as babies. These albums had become more precious than any royal treasure. As winter deepened, Catherine's condition continued to decline. She had good days when her energy returned and she could play with the children or walk in the garden with William. But the difficult days were becoming more frequent. William had arranged for a hospital bed to be set up in their bedroom, though Catherine rarely used it, preferring to rest in their familiar bed surrounded by pillows and the scent of the lavender sachets her mother had made. The decision about when to tell the children the complete truth weighed heavily on both parents. Catherine wanted to protect them from pain for as long as possible, while William worried about them feeling betrayed if they learned the truth from someone else. They had agreed to have the conversation after Christmas, wanting to give their children one last holiday filled with joy and innocence. Neither could imagine how they would find the words to say goodbye. Christmas morning arrived with unexpected warmth for December. Catherine had insisted on getting dressed and coming downstairs to watch the children open their presents. William helped her into her favorite red dress, the one she had worn to their first Christmas together as a married couple. It hung loose on her now, but her smile was radiant as she watched George, Charlotte, and Louis tear through wrapping paper with the enthusiasm only children possess. The family had decided to spend the holiday privately at their country home in Norfolk, away from the formal traditions of the royal Christmas at Sandringham. Catherine wanted this Christmas to be about them as a family, not as royals with duties and obligations. She sat in her favorite armchair by the fireplace, wrapped in a soft cashmere blanket, directing the chaos with gentle laughter and occasional tears of joy. William had arranged for a photographer to capture every moment of the day, understanding without words that this would likely be their last Christmas together, as a complete family. The photos showed genuine happiness despite the underlying sadness. Catherine helping Louis with a difficult toy, William reading to Charlotte, George proudly showing his mother his new art supplies. These images would become treasures beyond measure. After lunch, while the children played with their new toys in the living room, William and Catherine retreated to their bedroom for what had become their daily rest time. But instead of sleeping, they talked about practical matters that could no longer be avoided. Catherine had already selected the music she wanted played at her funeral service. She had chosen readings, flowers, and even the dress she wanted to be buried in. These conversations were difficult but necessary. The children had begun to understand that their mother was seriously ill, though they still did not grasp the full reality of the situation. Charlotte had started sleeping in her parents' bed most nights, curled up between William and Catherine. George had become unusually helpful around the house, as if good behavior could somehow change what was happening. Louis continued to be his cheerful, energetic self, though he refused to leave Catherine's side for very long. Dr. Henderson's Christmas visit was brief but concerning. Catherine's condition had deteriorated more rapidly than expected. The treatments that had been providing some relief were no longer effective, and her body was beginning to show signs of shutting down. He spoke privately with William in the study, explaining that they were likely looking at weeks rather than months. William felt the room spin around him as the words sank in. Catherine had completed her letters to the children and sealed them in individual boxes, along with small mementos and photographs. She had also written a long letter to William, filled with her love, gratitude for their years together, and hopes for his future. She gave him permission to find love again someday, though she knew he would resist the idea. She wanted him to know that her greatest wish was for him and their children to find happiness after she was gone. The couple had started having conversations about how William would explain her death to the children. They role-played different scenarios, trying to find words that would be honest but age-appropriate. Catherine wanted the children to understand that her love for them would continue even after she died, and that it was okay for them to be sad, angry, or confused. She also wanted them to know that taking care of each other and their father would be the best way to honor her memory. Their closest friends had begun visiting more frequently, understanding without being told that these might be their last opportunities to see Catherine. Sarah, her best friend from university, came for tea every Tuesday, bringing stories from the outside world and maintaining the kind of normal conversation that Catherine craved. These visits were precious lifelines to the person Catherine had been before illness consumed her identity. The palace staff had quietly begun making arrangements for what would inevitably come. The funeral would be a state occasion, requiring months of planning and coordination with governments around the world. But William had insisted that the service reflect Catherine's personality and wishes, not just royal protocol. She wanted it to be a celebration of life rather than a somber farewell, though she understood that the nation would need time to grieve. As January arrived, Catherine's good days became rarer. She spent most of her time in bed now, though she insisted on having dinner with the family whenever possible. William would carry her downstairs and settle her in her chair, where she would listen to the children's chatter about school and friends. These family dinners became sacred time, filled with love and laughter despite the sadness that hovered just beneath the surface. The weight of keeping this private was enormous for William. He longed to share his burden with the world, to ask for prayers and support, but Catherine had insisted on maintaining their privacy until the very end. She wanted to protect their children from media attention and speculation. Only their immediate family and closest staff knew how little time remained, and the secret felt like a physical weight that grew heavier each day. The conversation with the children came on a rainy Thursday morning in late January. Catherine had woken feeling clearer than she had in weeks, and she knew this might be her last opportunity to speak with them while she still had the strength. William gathered George, Charlotte, and Louis in their parents' bedroom, where Catherine sat propped up against pillows, wearing her favorite lavender silk scarf. She began by telling them how much she loved them, how proud she was of each of them, and how being their mother had been the greatest joy of her life. Then, with William holding her hand for support, she explained that her body was very sick and that the doctors could not make her better. She told them that she would always be with them in their hearts and memories, even when her body could no longer stay with them. George, mature beyond his 10 years, asked the question they had been dreading. "Are you going to die, Mama?" Catherine's voice remained steady as she answered honestly that yes, she would die, but that love never dies. Charlotte began to cry, climbing onto the bed to curl up against her mother's side. Louis, still too young to fully comprehend, simply asked if it would hurt, and Catherine assured him that she felt no pain when she was surrounded by her family's love. The family spent the rest of that day together, with Catherine sharing special memories she had of each child. She told George about the day he was born and how William had cried with happiness. She reminded Charlotte of the time they had baked cookies for her school fundraiser and ended up covered in flour. She sang Louis the lullaby she had created just for him when he was a baby. These conversations were heartbreaking and beautiful, filled with tears and laughter in equal measure. Dr. Henderson visited that evening and spoke privately with William. Catherine's body was beginning to shut down more rapidly now. Her breathing was becoming labored, and she was experiencing more confusion and fatigue. He estimated that she had perhaps a week left, possibly less. William felt the ground shift beneath his feet as he realized how little time remained for goodbyes and final moments together. The Queen arrived the next morning, requesting a private audience with Catherine. The two women had grown close over the years, and Her Majesty wanted to offer her personal thanks for Catherine's service to the crown and her devotion to her family. They talked for over an hour about the children's future, about William's needs as a widower and future king, and about Catherine's hopes for how she would be remembered. Catherine's parents had essentially moved into the palace, taking turns sitting with their daughter and helping with the grandchildren. Her father, Michael, spent hours reading aloud from her favorite books, while her mother, Carol, helped her eat when she could manage small portions of food. Watching their daughter fade away was the most difficult thing they had ever endured, but they were determined to be strong for her and the children. William had barely slept in weeks, afraid to miss any moment with Catherine. He would lie beside her at night, listening to her breathing, sometimes talking softly about their future plans, sometimes just holding her hand in comfortable silence. The nurses had offered to stay overnight to help, but William refused, wanting these final, intimate moments to belong to them alone. Catherine had asked to see the rose garden one more time. On a surprisingly warm afternoon, William wrapped her in blankets and wheeled her outside in a wheelchair. The winter roses were dormant, but Catherine could see the promise of spring in the carefully tended beds. She asked William to promise that he would bring the children to the garden to remember her, and that they would plant new roses together each year on her birthday. The palace chapel became a place of refuge for the family. Father Michael held special prayer services each evening, attended only by immediate family and staff. Catherine found comfort in the familiar words and rituals, and the children seemed to draw strength from the routine and sense of community. These services became a way of preparing everyone for the transition that was coming. Catherine's voice was growing weaker, making conversation difficult. She had to choose her words carefully, saving her energy for the most important things. She told each child individually how special they were, what qualities she admired in them, and what she hoped they would remember about her. She gave William final instructions about their care, about maintaining family traditions, and about ensuring they always knew how much they were loved. The media had begun to notice William's absence from public events, though the official explanations continued to cite family time and minor scheduling issues. A few persistent reporters were asking questions, but the palace's communication team had managed to maintain the privacy Catherine desired. William knew that the truth would come out soon enough, and he dreaded the moment when their private grief would become public property. As Catherine grew weaker, the children seemed to understand instinctively that their time with their mother was precious. They spent every possible moment in her room, reading to her, showing her their artwork from school, and simply being present with her. These final days were filled with an intensity of love that everyone in the family would carry with them forever. The final weekend arrived with unseasonable sunshine streaming through the bedroom windows. Catherine had not spoken much in 2 days, but her eyes remained alert and loving as she watched her family gathered around her bed. William sat in a chair beside her, holding her hand, while the children took turns lying next to her, sharing quiet moments that would become treasured memories. Dr. Henderson had explained to William that Catherine was entering the final stage. Her breathing was shallow and irregular, and she spent most of her time sleeping. But during her wakeful moments, she would look at each family member with such love and gratitude that it took their breath away. These silent exchanges communicated more than words ever could. George had asked if he could read to his mother from her favorite book, the one she had shared with him when he was younger. His voice, still high and clear, filled the room with the familiar words as Catherine's lips curved into the faintest smile. Charlotte sat at the foot of the bed, carefully brushing her mother's thin hair with gentle strokes. Louis had fallen asleep curled against Catherine's side, his small hand clutching hers. William had called Catherine's sister Pippa, who arrived within hours with her husband and children. The house filled with family members who understood that this was likely their last opportunity to say goodbye. But rather than feeling somber, there was a sense of celebration as everyone shared stories about Catherine, laughed at funny memories, and expressed gratitude for the time they had been given with her. The palace staff had created an invisible protective bubble around the family during these final days. Meals appeared without anyone having to ask. Household tasks were handled quietly and efficiently, and phone calls were screened to prevent any interruptions. Even the usually protocol-conscious courtiers had stepped back, understanding that this time belonged to the family, not to royal duties. Father Michael arrived on Sunday afternoon for what everyone understood would be Catherine's last blessing. The entire family gathered in the bedroom as he offered prayers of comfort and gratitude. Catherine's eyes were closed, but her breathing seemed to become more peaceful during the service. Afterward, he spoke privately with William about the funeral arrangements and offered his continued support for the family during the difficult days ahead. As Sunday evening approached, Catherine's breathing became more labored. William sent the children to have dinner with their grandparents, wanting to spare them from witnessing their mother's final struggle. He sat beside Catherine's bed, talking softly about their life together, about his love for her, and about his promises to care for their children and honor her memory. Catherine opened her eyes one last time around 9 o'clock that evening. William leaned close to hear her whisper, "Take care of them. Be happy." Her voice was barely audible, but the words were clear. William assured her that he would, that the children would know how much she loved them, and that her memory would live on in everything they did. Catherine's eyes closed again and her breathing became even more shallow. The family was quietly called back to the bedroom around 10 o'clock. Even Louis, despite his young age, seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. They formed a circle around Catherine's bed, each person touching her hand or arm, letting her know through their presence that she was surrounded by love. The room was peaceful, filled with the soft sound of quiet prayers and whispered words of love. Catherine took her final breath just before midnight, so peacefully that for a moment no one was certain she was gone. William gently closed her eyes and kissed her forehead, whispering a final goodbye. The children each kissed their mother's cheek, and Charlotte placed her favorite stuffed animal in Catherine's arms. The grief was overwhelming, but there was also a sense of profound gratitude for the woman who had loved them all so completely. Dr. Henderson confirmed what everyone already knew, and the necessary official procedures began quietly. William held his children close as they cried, understanding that their lives had changed forever in that moment. But even through their tears, there was something peaceful about Catherine's passing. She had died surrounded by love at home with dignity and grace intact. The Queen was informed immediately, and she arrived within an hour to offer her condolences and support. She spent time with each of the children, sharing her own memories of their mother and assuring them that Catherine would be remembered as one of the most beloved members of the royal family. Her presence provided comfort and stability during the most difficult night of their lives. As dawn broke on Monday morning, William stood at the window looking out at the garden where Catherine had spent so many peaceful hours. The roses were still dormant, but he could already imagine the explosion of blooms that would come with spring. He knew that Catherine would want him to focus on life continuing, on their children growing up strong and happy, and on finding joy even in the midst of grief. The hardest part of his journey was just beginning, but her love would guide him through it. The palace announcement came at 8 o'clock Monday morning, delivered with the simple dignity that Catherine would have wanted. The statement revealed that the Princess of Wales had passed away peacefully at home, surrounded by her loving family, after a private battle with cancer. Within minutes, the news had spread around the world, and tributes began pouring in from heads of state, celebrities, and ordinary people whose lives Catherine had touched through her charitable work. William spent the morning with his children, helping them understand what would happen next. He explained that many people around the world had loved their mother and would want to say goodbye, which meant there would be ceremonies and public events, but he assured them that their private grief was theirs alone, and that they would always have quiet moments to remember her without the world watching. The flowers began arriving at palace gates before noon. Thousands of bouquets, handwritten cards, and personal tributes created an impromptu memorial that stretched for blocks. People of all ages stood quietly behind the barriers, some crying, others sharing memories of meeting Catherine at charity events or royal engagements. The outpouring of love was overwhelming and provided unexpected comfort to William and the children. George, Charlotte, and Louis spent much of that first day looking through photo albums and watching home videos of their mother. William had collected hours of footage over the years, Catherine reading bedtime stories, helping with school projects, laughing at family jokes, and simply being present for all the ordinary moments that make up a life. These recordings became precious treasures, ways for the children to hear their mother's voice and see her smile whenever they needed to. The planning for Catherine's funeral began immediately, though William insisted that the service reflect her personality, rather than just royal protocol. She had wanted music that celebrated life, readings that spoke of hope and love, and flowers that would remind everyone of her favorite garden. The service would be held at Westminster Abbey, but William arranged for private moments before and after the public ceremony. Messages of condolence arrived from around the globe. Presidents, prime ministers, and royal families expressed their grief and shared personal memories of Catherine. But perhaps more meaningful were the thousands of cards and letters from ordinary people who had been touched by her warmth and genuine care for others. William read many of these aloud to the children, helping them understand how special their mother had been to people everywhere. Catherine's parents struggled with their own grief while trying to support their grandchildren. Carol spent hours with Charlotte, helping her write in a special journal where she could record her feelings and memories. Michael worked with George on a photo project, creating a scrapbook that would preserve their favorite moments with Catherine. These activities provided healing for both the adults and children, while creating lasting tributes to Catherine's life. The palace staff, who had worked closely with Catherine for over a decade, were deeply affected by her death. Mrs. Morrison, the head housekeeper, organized a private memorial service for the staff, where they shared stories about Catherine's kindness, her interest in their families, and her ability to make everyone feel valued. These behind-the-scenes memories revealed the genuine person behind the public role. William found himself overwhelmed by practical decisions that had to be made. What clothes should the children wear to the funeral? How much of the service should they attend? Which of Catherine's charities should continue to receive royal patronage? Every choice felt enormous because Catherine was no longer there to discuss it with him. He relied heavily on his private secretary and Catherine's closest friends to help navigate these decisions. The media coverage was intense but largely respectful, focusing on Catherine's charitable work and her role as a mother, rather than speculating about her illness or the family's private grief. William had specifically requested that journalists respect his children's privacy during this difficult time, and most major news organizations honored that request. The public seemed to understand that this was a time for mourning, not sensationalism. 3 days after Catherine's death, William made his first public appearance at the palace gates to thank the crowds who had gathered to pay their respects. He walked among the flowers and tributes, stopping to speak with people who had waited hours just to offer their condolences. The genuine emotion from strangers who had loved Catherine from afar provided unexpected comfort and reminded William that his family's grief was shared by millions. The children attended a small private service at the palace chapel, where Father Michael helped them say their own personal goodbyes to their mother. Each child had prepared something special. George had written a poem, Charlotte had drawn a picture, and Louis had picked flowers from Catherine's favorite garden spot. These intimate moments allowed them to begin processing their loss in their own ways. As the day of the funeral approached, William felt the weight of having to share his grief with the world. Catherine's death belonged to their family, but her funeral would be a national event watched by millions. He struggled with the balance between honoring his wife publicly and protecting his children's private mourning. The conflicting demands of being a grieving widower and a future king had never felt more difficult to navigate. The morning of Catherine's funeral dawned gray and cold, but by the time the procession began, unexpected sunshine had broken through the clouds. William stood with his children in the palace courtyard, watching as Catherine's coffin was placed on the gun carriage that would carry her to Westminster Abbey. The sight of her favorite white roses covering the casket brought tears to his eyes. But he remained composed for his children's sake. George walked beside his father with remarkable dignity for a 10-year-old, his small hand occasionally reaching for William's during the most difficult moments. Charlotte held tightly to her grandfather Charles's hand, while Louis rode in a car with his grandparents, still too young for the full ceremony. The streets of London were lined with millions of people who had come to say goodbye to their beloved princess. Inside Westminster Abbey, the service began with Catherine's favorite hymn, sung by a choir whose voices seemed to lift the grief and transform it into something beautiful. William had chosen readers carefully. Catherine's sister Pippa shared a passage about love being stronger than death, while Harry read from Corinthians about faith, hope, and love. Each word seemed chosen specifically for Catherine, speaking to her character and the love she had brought into the world. The Archbishop of Canterbury's eulogy painted a picture of Catherine as a devoted mother, loving wife, and committed public servant who had used her platform to make a real difference in people's lives. He spoke about her work with mental health charities, her support for early childhood development, and her ability to connect with people from all walks of life. But most importantly, he honored her as a woman who had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. When the service moved to the private burial at Windsor, only immediate family and closest friends were present. This was the goodbye that belonged to them alone. William's composure finally broke as Catherine's coffin was lowered into the ground in the private burial ground, where his grandmother, the Queen Mother, and grandfather, Prince Philip, also rested. The children each threw a handful of earth onto the casket, their small acts of farewell marking the end of their life as they had known it. The reception afterward was held at the castle, where family and friends shared memories and celebrated Catherine's life, rather than dwelling on their loss. Stories were told about her sense of humor, her competitive spirit during family games, and her fierce protection of her children's privacy. These personal remembrances helped everyone begin the process of healing, while keeping Catherine's spirit alive in their hearts. In the weeks that followed, William faced the enormous challenge of helping his children navigate their grief while managing his own. George returned to school with the support of teachers who had been briefed on his situation. Charlotte struggled with nightmares and often climbed into William's bed for comfort. Louis, still processing what death meant, would sometimes ask when Mama was coming home, breaking William's heart each time. The letters and videos Catherine had prepared began to arrive at significant moments. On Charlotte's 9th birthday, 3 months after the funeral, she received a letter from her mother telling her how proud she was of her kindness and creativity. The message brought tears but also comfort, as if Catherine was still present for the important moments. William realized these letters would be lifelines for his children as they grew up. The Queen provided steady support for William as he learned to balance single parenthood with his royal duties. She often invited the children for private tea, sharing stories about their mother and helping them understand their place in the royal family's future. Her own experience with loss and duty provided wisdom that William desperately needed during the darkest moments. 6 months after Catherine's death, William took the children to plant roses in her memorial garden at Kensington Palace. As they worked together in the soil, Charlotte asked if her mother could see them. William knelt down and told her that love never really dies, that it lives on in the people we care about and the good things we do. George added that he felt closest to his mother when they were all together as a family. The first anniversary of Catherine's death was marked privately by the family, with a small service at the chapel, followed by a picnic in her favorite spot in the palace gardens. William read from the letter Catherine had written to him, sharing her hopes that he would find happiness again, and her gratitude for the love they had shared. The children had grown taller, more mature. carrying their grief with dignity that would have made their mother proud. As the second year began, William realized that while the acute pain of loss had softened, Catherine's presence remained strong in their daily lives. Her values guided his parenting decisions, her laughter echoed in their family jokes, and her love continued to surround them through the memories they cherished and the stories they shared. The wordless goodbye they had shared in those final moments had said everything that needed to be said. That love endures beyond death, that family bonds are stronger than loss, and that the greatest tribute to someone's life is to continue loving as fully as they did the millions who had been moved to tears by William and Catherine's farewell had witnessed something profound about the nature of love and loss. Their private grief, shared so publicly, had reminded the world that beneath titles and crowns they were simply a family saying goodbye to someone irreplaceable. And in that shared humanity, their wordless goodbye had indeed moved millions, not just to tears but to a deeper appreciation for the love they carried in their own lives.